Daniel chapter 7, possibly the most important chapter in all the Old Testament. Daniel is having a vision, and he says this in verse 9. I watched till thrones. Interesting, we have not just a throne in the heavens, but plural thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated, literally the Old One, and so everyone knows that's Yahweh. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. 1,000 thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. Yahweh has a court. This is where we get the term divine council, or one of the places we do. The idea that Yahweh has other beings, other Elohim with him, loyal to his cause. May your will be done on earth as it's being done in heaven. Again, we get that sense in this kind of a story. In this vision, a very clear idea that Yahweh has Elohim serving him. Well, verse 13. Daniel says this, I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like a son of man, Kevar Enosh. We've heard before Elohim is the term above the line, and Adam is below in Hebrew. In Aramaic, Elohim is above the line, and Enosh is the term for human. So what the text is saying is that Daniel is watching this vision of Yahweh, and one like a bar, that's son in Aramaic, Enosh. Very clearly it's saying one like a human being, a son of man, or one who is a human. So we are introducing, and this is the first time, even as I draw it here, after doing this all through the Old Testament, this is the first time that we have had a story where I am drawing a human being above that dotted line. It's meant to be a shock to our system, and in fact it was a shock to Daniel, I am sure. So let's listen again. I was watching in the night visions of this scene, and behold, one like a son of man, or a human being, coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him before him. It seems to be this picture. Daniel is watching this scene unfold, and they, these other Elohim, see this human being in the courtroom of Yahweh, completely out of place, right? And they bring him in before him, as though to say, notice what we have here, King. We have a human being in our presence, which would be, again, unfathomable to the story. So the point is, there's a hush. What will Yahweh do to this intruder, as it were, this human being who is in his courtroom? Well, here's what happens. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. Well, three things I'd like to say about this story in conclusion. And this brings, first of all, this brings back a memory of 10 years ago, when I was teaching in a Christian university, and I had a habit of bringing in a Jew, part of the Jewish-Christian dialogue in the Twin Cities. The Jewish team, or Confederation of Jewish leaders in the Twin City area, likes to send Jews into Christian classrooms for dialogue purposes, and I got to know the group, and I called once and said, could I have one of your representatives join me in a classroom at my Christian university? And we talked over the phone, and of course we had this rule that there would be no proselytizing. I wasn't there to challenge him, and nor would he come into my classroom and challenge my students. It would just be a time of dialogue to understand how the the Jewish mind understood certain passages of the Old Testament. So in came this gentleman. His name was Saul, a very delightful man, and we talked before we came into class together. And I just told him this, that what I'm going to do today is go through a passage in the Jewish Bible, Old Testament, and I just want you to listen to it. And I'm going to be explaining it in front of the students, and then I would like you to give your Jewish interpretation of that passage. And he said that'd be fine. Well, what I showed him and what I showed the students that day was exactly this picture here. I simply read through Daniel chapter 7 and talked about this human being who was brought into the courtroom of Yahweh by these other Elohim. And then, to the astonishment of the hearer, and I think even Daniel, to him was given, how does the text go? Dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. At that point I stopped, just like I did here, and I turned to my friend Saul, and I said, what do you think? What would be the Jewish reaction to this passage from your own Bible in Daniel chapter 7? And I'll never forget, he was standing by the chalkboard, and he backed up a little bit, and he said these words, I have never seen this in my life. And from there we had an interesting conversation, of course, right in front of my students about this idea that Yahweh would give a human being all the kingdoms of the earth. We didn't talk about Jesus that day. We didn't need to in that sense because it was an Old Testament class. The Christian students in the classroom knew where this was going, but I found it fascinating that a Jewish person who was used to going into Christian settings and talk about the Bible had never heard this text explained point for point as he did that day. The other thing, or secondly, I want to bring up about this, we have talked about the David slot, the Messiah slot, the authority slot. Remember the decree of the Watchers back in chapter 4. I would like to call this the worship slot. The idea that we have, of course, in the Old Testament, monotheism itself defines worship as the worship of one, right? We are worshiping Yahweh and Yahweh alone. Even though he's surrounded by loyal Elohim, our worship goes to one person. Notice what happens in this story, which for the first time in the biblical story is Yahweh giving worship or demanding worship to someone other than himself, and that being happens to be a human being. Thirdly, as we think of how this will be used in the future, in Mark 14, Jesus is coming into the last hours of his life. He is being interrogated by the high priest. And at one point, it seems to be the critical moment of Jesus' last hours on earth, the high priest hushes the crowd. There have been witnesses that have debated Jesus' identity and disagreed and so forth. And finally, the high priest quiets everyone down, and he turns to Jesus and he says, "So are you the Son of the Blessed, that is, the Christ?" This is in Mark 14. And Jesus uses these words in reply. This is all he says, apparently. "You will see the Bar Enosh sitting at the right hand of the power, coming with the clouds of heaven." In other words, at the very moment, the most critical moment of Jesus' own life, he simply quotes Daniel 7 as the text that identifies who he is.